Good morning. My name is Idonia Gady, and I am a proud 2009 graduate of the BC School of Social Work. I am so proud, in fact, that when presented with the opportunity, I jumped at being a member of the BC School of Social Work Alumni Board. It is in that capacity that I address you this morning. The board has the privilege each year of selecting the recipients of the Distinguished Alumni Awards. These awards honor BC School of Social Work MSW or PhD alumni who have made significant contributions to the social work profession. Each year, it is a challenging task to narrow down the outstanding group of nominees to select just two, but we are so excited about the recipients who are being recognized today. This morning, we have the pleasure of hearing from both the nominators and the award winners. So, as a nominator of the first award recipient, it is my pleasure to tell you a bit about why I nominated him. In the media today, we hear more than ever about the need for increased services to the chronically mentally ill and those who suffer from substance abuse disorders. Often it is in the context of tragedy, such as mass shootings or drug overdose deaths, that are far too frequent in our society. However, we rarely hear about the people who are on the front lines advocating and increasing services to the underserved populations. Our recipient has spent his career as a social worker doing just that. In each of his roles, he has worked to help the disenfranchised and those whom society often lets fall through the cracks. He has been working coordinated team efforts to help individuals with severe and persistent mental illness to stay in the community and work towards recovery. In addition, he works with our veterans of the United States military to ensure that they get the services to which they are entitled and to which they deserve. He has been leading teams for most of his career, and it is in his gift as a leader that I first met him. This recipient was my field supervisor at Boston Emergency Services team during my first year at BC. What was remarkable about him to me was that his relative inexperience, having only been out of graduate school for 1 year, did not limit his desire or ability to start giving back to the field. He wanted to mentor and teach new social workers, not because he got paid more to do so, but because he had a heart for giving back within the field of social work. I'd like to share just one experience we had when he was supervising me to illustrate his professionalism and leadership ability. Early in my time as a supervisee, we were conducting an emergency psychiatric evaluation on a young woman with severe psychiatric and substance abuse issues. This woman slipped into the bathroom and overdosed on heroin while we were waiting for an ambulance to take her to the emergency room. He remained calm, he took control of the situation, and was able to direct me to contact 911 while he attended to this young woman. Because of his ability to remain calm and professional, the paramedics quickly arrived and she was revived. As my supervisor, his next priority was to check in and help me as a student intern process what we had just experienced. He did so with kindness and empathy that I know illustrates the kind of compassionate social work he does each day in his work with clients. This is the final thing I will say about our first recipient. He treats each person he meets with dignity, compassion, and humor. This is not uniquely a social work quality by any means, but it is a quality that Boston College and the School of Social Work certainly cultivate in the students who come here to study, and he is a superb example of that quality. In the way he respectfully cared for a person in a Boston hospital emergency room who was experiencing a psychiatric crisis, or in the manner he uses to encourage and advocate for services for a veteran, he does so with dignity and compassion. So it is for these reasons that I proudly nominated Daniel Gill for this year's Recent Distinguished Alumni Award.
Good morning. Have to forgive me. I've been up since 4 a.m. My wife and I just flew in from Baltimore this morning for this, so. All right, so before I attempt to impart any words of wisdom, let me begin by thanking the Boston College School of Social Work Alumni Board for this honor. I'd also like to offer a special thank you to Idonia Gady, who so graciously nominated me for this award, and also a congratulations to Dr. Willison, the other Alumni Award winner, whose career accomplishments are something to aspire to. Concurrently, I'd like to thank the Boston College School of Social Work, the entire program from start to finish. BC offered me the opportunity to obtain my MSW here, and I took full advantage of that chance. As a result of what I learned in the classroom and in my field placements, I felt fully prepared to begin my career upon graduating nearly 10 years ago. So, little story. I was on a police cruiser in Boston 8 or 9 years ago. It's a really different perspective when you're in the car looking out. I think I'd only had my MSW for a year or so at the time. The looks that you get can be those of curiosity or of fear. I'd never been in a police car before, and I haven't been in one since. At the time, I was fortunate enough to have been asked by my boss with the best team if I would be interested in riding along with an officer from the Boston Police Department's A1 district, as we were looking to better our relationship with the Boston Police Department and to help them better work with homeless individuals in Boston who might be experiencing mental illness. As we happened upon an apparently homeless man sleeping on the common, the officer pulled up next to him and rolled down the window. What happened next blew my mind a little bit. They addressed each other by first name in as natural a manner as I would with my friends or with my peers. The man indicated he was fine, that he was not in need of any help, and that he planned to be on his way. And that was that. It's an image I won't forget, and the homeless population is now one I have the pleasure of working with regularly in my current position. When I was given some basic information about what to speak about today, one of the suggested points was how attending BC influenced my career choice, direction, and success. Put simply, my post-MSW career started as a direct result of my second-year internship. I was at the Brigham and Women's Hospital on the addiction psychiatry team and happened to be seeing a patient who was also being evaluated by the Boston Emergency Services team, or the BEST team. I approached the staff from BEST, who happened to be the assistant director, introduced myself, and asked if they were going to be hiring anytime soon. I was a few weeks away from graduation. Shortly thereafter, I had an interview, and a few short weeks after that, I started working at BEST. Suffice to say, without my BC internship at the Brigham and Women's Hospital, I can't begin to speculate where my career would have brought me. The BEST team was an incredible opportunity. I was able to apply and sharpen my clinical assessment skills on a daily basis while becoming familiar with and networking with numerous facilities and organizations in the greater Boston area. I took my first ever student intern, Idonia, whom I have remained in touch with since. I developed lasting friendships with some incredible social workers there. To name a few that I saw, and I know are in today's crowd, Bizrat, who's also a BC grad, and my supervisor, Ed. Ed is not a BC alum. However, he's such a fantastic boss and amazing social worker that I hope we can all forgive him for that. The BEST team led to me leading an assertive community treatment team, which led to me starting up and leading a medical services team, which led to my starting at the U.S. Department of Veterans Affairs in late 2010. There, I've been helping homeless veterans obtain and maintain housing in the HUD-VASH program. I've done so in 3 different roles, first as a case manager, then a substance use disorder specialist, and now as a team lead. And I've done this in 2 different states. In every position that I've had, I've benefited from something I learned at BC or in my field placements. Although I don't do one-to-one therapy at this point in my career, I utilize components of solution-focused therapy on a regular basis, something I learned in the classroom from Professor Susan Tone. I gained a better global perspective on trauma while studying in Northern Ireland with Professor Leslie Wind, who I believe is now at USC. I saw the Red Sox break the curse in 2004 and got to discuss this regularly with Professor Katie McInnes-Dietrich before each session of my first semester intro class, during which she truly helped us begin to understand the fundamentals of our chosen profession. I've utilized the psychosocial assessment skills I developed at the Brigham from my supervisor, Melanie Renaud, in every job I've had since obtaining my MSW. In every professional position I've had, I've built on and improved upon what I learned in my previous job. Over the past 10 years or so, I've had the opportunity to serve so many people in need, to work alongside so many amazing professionals, and to feel each day as though, and as cliche as this might sound, I'm making a difference. All along, the theme and the underlying foundation to this is the education and the opportunities that BC afforded to me. And looking back at the past 10 or so years, another general commonality in the direction of my career is that I've never had a post-MSW job that has had me solely based in an office. This is not at all, not even slightly, a knock against those who do seek and work in office-based positions. There is incredible need and significant talent in this setting. However, as everyone here knows, social work doesn't only happen within the walls of any given building. Sure, it happens in hospitals, in schools, in homes, and clinics, but it also happens under bridges, in tent cities, at Dunkin' Donuts, and on the Common. This community-based approach has evolved from one of the major foundations of the social work practice, settlement houses, something I remember learning about during my first semester here. At the time, during my first semester, I didn't see how this would connect to my professional career. It was just a pretty neat history lesson. Looking back, I can truly embrace it now. I see how what I do now is connected to the history of my chosen profession, how it has evolved, and perhaps, most importantly, how some things simply haven't changed at all. Having left my home state of Massachusetts 2 years ago to settle down in Maryland, I learned something new about Boston College and the School of Social Work, and that is how deeply respected BC and the School of Social Work are outside of Massachusetts. When moving to Maryland, I had a general idea of what to expect with regards to continuing as a VA employee. However, nothing prepared me for the positive remarks and compliments I have received when people learn that I obtained my MSW here at BC. Generally, when veterans and colleagues alike see my Patriots or my Bruins or my Sox memorabilia in my office, them being mostly from Baltimore, I get less than favorable comments. However, when they see the BC logo or they see my diploma from the School of Social Work, there's nothing but true, genuine respect. The pride I have in my BC School of Social Work degree is greater now than it was when I was still in Massachusetts. And I encourage all the current students here to really embrace the fact that you earned your MSW from this institution, as it will certainly be embraced by others when you begin and throughout your career. I certainly can't finish today without recognizing one other BC social work graduate, she's an MSW from 2011, who's had a profound influence on me, and that's Caroline Gill. Caroline is a fellow social worker at the VA Maryland Healthcare System, where she is transitioning into a role as a critical time intervention social worker under the Mental Health Intensive Case Management Program. Not only is Caroline an outstanding social worker, she's a wonderful wife, she's my best friend, and she's an amazing mom. So thank you, Caroline, for supporting me along the way. And thanks again to the Boston College School of Social Work for both this recognition and for providing me with the foundation and springboard for my career. Thank you so much, and have a wonderful day and weekend.
Now, please join me in welcoming Nora Rushford, who will now offer an introduction to our next award recipient.
Thank you. I am so pleased to be here to introduce Dr. Judith Willison, our Distinguished Alumni Award winner. But in the interest of full transparency, I have to say that I am not the nominee for, or I actually did not nominate Judith. Cindy Gordon and Bizrat Abibi did that, and Cindy asked me if I would do the introduction, so thank you, Cindy. I met Judith in 1986 here at BC School of Social Work in one of these classrooms down the hall somewhere. I believe it was in an HBSE classroom. And at that time, I think it was a very large number of people, and we would always sit in the very back of the room. And instead of being busy paying attention to our professor, we were busy becoming lifelong friends. In a moment, you're going to hear Judith talk about her accomplishments over these past 30 years since we graduated. All those things that make her truly an outstanding recipient of this award. I just wanted to take a few brief moments to share a couple of things that aren't going to show up in Judith's bio. These are a few things that those of us who have worked with her side by side, followed her in the classroom, or had the privilege of having her as a mentor know so well. There are so many superlatives that any of us could use to describe Judith and her work. She is brilliant. She is really outstanding in anything that she chooses to do. But there's a word that comes to mind when I think of my friend and colleague, and that word is careful. And yes, I know that seems like such a pedestrian word for such an outstanding social worker, but let me explain. Judith is always careful of the rights of others. She's careful never to make assumptions about people, and if she does, she is always careful to allow herself to be challenged. She is careful with the lives and the souls of those she collaborates with, whether they are friends, colleagues, students, victims of violence, or perpetrators of violence. She's careful to understand that there are multiple truths, different rich stories that we all have to tell. And she's always careful to recognize and work toward the elimination of oppression and social injustices. While others are screaming from the rafters, Judith is leading us with her quiet defiance and her carefully chosen words. Judith is at a point in her career, she tells me this all the time, where she no longer wants to be in charge of anything. She's had that opportunity and done an exemplary job of it. And yet she will always be a leader. Please join me in welcoming our award recipient, Dr. Judith Willison.
She's making me cry. That's not fair. Thank you, Nora. Thank you, Cindy. Thank you, Bizrat. It's great to be here. It's great to be back. I'm honored to be chosen for the Distinguished Alumni Award, and I'm really happy to have an opportunity to talk with you this morning. My experience in the BC MSW program from '85 to '87 was profoundly shaped by my decision to be part of the forensic concentration. At that time, and to this day, it's the only MSW program in the state, and one of very few nationally, that had a forensic concentration. And because they were going to pay us to work in correctional settings for our internships, and I was putting myself through school, that made me pretty interested in the program. Both my field placements were in the correctional system, first year in a prison, and my second year was at Bridgewater State Hospital. And I was compelled to accept a job offer there when I finished, not only because of the complex and challenging clinical work with men who were living with chronic, serious mental illness, who had used violence against others and often against themselves, and my growing interest in the relationship between trauma and violence, but also I was compelled by the need for change in a criminal justice system that contributes to the oppression of marginalized people. Students in the forensic concentration here at BC took specialized courses. We had a course with a judge. We had a course with a social worker who was also a JD. And we met as a group with Tom Walsh regularly for forensic supervision, consultation, and training, because at that time he was the executive director of the Massachusetts Prison Mental Health Program. And that was really one of the highlights of our training here, was with him. My positive experience in the forensic concentration here literally determined the course of my social work career. I remained in forensic social work as a clinician, supervisor, trainer, and administrator for 24 years until 2011, when I finally finished my PhD and became a full-time academic in the School of Social Work at Bridgewater State University, where I am now. I continue to work in the community with forensic social workers. I no longer go into correctional institutions. We were just talking about the toll that that takes after many years, not primarily because of the prisoners, but because of the very hostile environment and the difficult relationship with the people who are trying to run those places. My practice as a social worker put me amidst the effects of the entrenched social, economic, and racial segregation of our communities. The most unremitting of those effects has been the disproportionate representation of impoverished people, and particularly impoverished people of color, in the criminal and juvenile justice systems. I'm very sorry to say that during those years, for the length of my working career, the disproportionate nature of the phenomenon has only intensified. When I was here in grad school, there were about 500,000 people in prisons and jails across the country. Today, there are 2.2 million. When I was in grad school, there were about 1,400,000 folks on parole or probation. Today, there are 4,700,000. Right now, 1 in 35 adults in the US are under some form of correctional supervision. As the effects of mass incarceration ramped up during those years, and people poured into the adult and juvenile justice systems across the country, these systems struggled to meet constitutionally minimal standards for treatment of prisoners with existing mental illness and those who suffered from mental health problems subsequent to prison trauma, including abuse and lengthy periods in isolation. After my 7-year tenure at Bridgewater State Hospital, I joined an organization called Forensic Health Services. I was there for over 15 years. Cindy Gordon and I worked there together for almost that entire time. And we were called upon by state and county governments, as well as federal court monitors, to evaluate existing mental health programs and to build new mental health programs. Because these organizations needed our expertise in correctional mental health, it put us in a unique position to advocate for reforms within these systems. One example of this was our work educating correctional administrators about the effects of solitary confinement on children and adults living with mental illness and mental health problems. Of course, we used the argument that was most compelling within the system, which was that it was far less expensive to modify solitary confinement practices than to hospitalize a prisoner who had seriously injured themselves. Beginning in 1993, I began teaching as an adjunct at numerous graduate schools of social work in Massachusetts, and I found a real passion of mine. I love teaching. I can't believe I get paid to teach full-time now. It's like a miracle. Teaching was and is an avenue for me to synthesize my practice experience, my commitment to social justice, the research and the literature in creative ways. For instance, I developed an MSW elective starting in 1999, which I taught and continue to teach. I taught it out at Smith for many years and at Simmons. It focuses on a multi-systemic approach to assessment and intervention with violence. This course, and I didn't know this was going to happen, but this course radically expands students' ideas about violence as not just an interpersonal event, which is generally how we think about violence, but as enacted on cultural, structural, and institutional levels. After I finished my doctoral program, I learned that having those 3 letters after your name, the P, the H, and the D, gives you some serious privilege. I had taught at Smith for almost 10 years, quietly as an anonymous adjunct. But about 20 minutes after I got my PhD, I was invited to be the keynote speaker at their main summer event. I decided to take the opportunity to talk about what I really cared about, a phenomenon I call social exile related to race, class, and mass incarceration. Some have called it the civic death of those enmeshed in the criminal justice system. Since then, I've taken every opportunity to talk about this little-known set of unfathomable injustices committed against increasing numbers of people in the US. So you'll have to bear with me. You are a captive audience. We think of exile as living in another country, involuntarily. Exile means banishment, and the dictionary definition reads, banishment, the state of being expelled from one's native country or place of residence by authority and forbidden to return, either for a limited time or for life. Consider the loss of citizenship rights of anyone convicted of any act that the state's law classify as a felony, and you will realize that this is banishment from the community of United States citizens. Voting rights can be taken from those with a felony conviction in 48 states. Some states disenfranchise individuals for life. Today, 5.85 million Americans are unable to vote due to state felony disenfranchisement policies. Because of the system that Michelle Alexander dubbed the new Jim Crow, 1 in every 10 African Americans is unable to vote in this country. The UN Human Rights Committee has charged that the US disenfranchisement policies are discriminatory and violate international law. Convicted felons are not allowed to fulfill jury duty. 31 states and the federal government subscribe to the practice of lifetime felony exclusion from juries. As a result, 30% of black men are automatically banned from jury service for life. And remember that convicted felons are not exactly who we think they are. 85 to 90% of criminal cases are resolved by plea bargain. Prosecutors push defendants into pleading guilty to a felony to avoid trial when they're told they'll get a longer sentence. Convicted felons are barred from public housing, discriminated against by private landlords, those charged with the crime and their families, ineligible for food stamps. Many employment applications require to state that you are a convicted felon and disqualify you. They are denied licenses for a wide range of professions. They may lose their driver's license. If not a citizen, they can be immediately deported. They may have related court costs and be reincarcerated if they can't pay. This system is so obviously a recipe for failure for those who are formerly incarcerated because they are railroaded to fail. When we really examine imprisonment and the far-reaching sanctions imposed after imprisonment, it is clear that the prisons and jails and juvenile detention centers and the communities suffering from concentrated and persistent poverty are places of social exile. Anyone who has a family member or a neighbor or has known or worked with someone who is going through or has gone through today's criminal justice system has had the opportunity to see how harsh and desolate conditions are inside our jails and prisons. And although my clients over many, many years told me again and again their stories of social exile, neither they nor I knew what to call it at the time or how to talk about it. I worked with 14-year-olds, so did Cindy, who, if convicted, faced an automatic sentence of death in prison. That's life in prison without the possibility of parole. I worked with a 15-year-old who did 5 years in jail and then prison, convicted for a murder he did not commit. My traditional clinical skills did not help me there. This is a social justice issue. This is an issue of advocacy and change. The effects of social exile disproportionately impact impoverished communities of color due to institutional racism at all levels of law enforcement, the judiciary, and corrections. It is a fact the U.S. imprisons a larger percentage of its black population than South Africa did at the height of apartheid. 1 in 13 of all adult black males are incarcerated on any given day, and for black males in their late 20s, the figure is 1 in 8. Okay, you get the idea. I could go on, but I won't. I'm supposed to talk about my career. The good news is that in the last 6 years or so, the problems of mass incarceration, racial bias in the criminal justice and juvenile justice system, and the effects of some of this social exile has become more seen in the media, and people are beginning to talk about it, and that gives me hope. So my research interests, as you can imagine, focus on this area. And one profound example of the intersections of gender, class, and racial disadvantage within the system of social exile, women involved in the criminal justice system. And although the media downplays the role that changes in law enforcement and judiciary policies play, in reality, when we look at the hard facts, at the research, the behaviors of women have changed very little, despite the fact that they have been incarcerated at a rate much faster than men in the last 15 years. For women, the relationship to violence is fraught with their histories of violent victimization and resulting trauma, addiction, and mental health issues. Over the years, I met and came to know many women who were incarcerated for offenses that are labeled as violent, some of whom had murdered or assaulted intimate partners who had chronically victimized them, some of whom had fought with another woman over a man, and some of whom had been implicated as accessories to serious violent offenses, including murder, committed by their male partners because they let him stay the night, or because they were too afraid to stop him. Some of these women clearly made a choice to engage in violent behavior, but a sizable number of these women felt they had, or actually did have, very little choice. My colleagues and I were tasked with providing risk assessment and treatment services within prisons for these women, and we found very little in the literature in terms of evidence-based practices or guidelines for either. That's partly because the circumstances of women's violent crimes are not well known, and partly because correctional systems were designed by and for men. The two studies I have conducted were born out of my belief that the social and institutional settings in which violent behavior takes place and against which these events are perceived and interpreted must influence our understanding of the cause of the problem. In other words, and this is what my students have a hard time wrapping their head around, violent behavior is not simply behavior. Rather, it's embedded in the social context, the socioeconomic structures, and the socio-political climate that frame the individual person's world. As such, both studies were designed to place risk correlates for women's violent crime in a social and political context. Since almost all women who are in prison are socially marginalized in one way, I wondered, what differentiates women in prison for violent crimes? It's about 30% of women in prison. Were there differences in risk factors in their lives that led them down the pathway to violent crime in particular? We know that women in prison are more likely than women in the community and than men in prison to have histories of being victims of violence, resulting mental health problems, and substance abuse. My first study bore this out. It was a sample of 2,857 surveys completed by women who were in prison in the US. In fact, my study had even higher levels of abuse and adverse life experiences in their histories. We know that women are unique from men in part due to their gendered experiences of multiple oppressions. My second and current study seeks to deepen our knowledge and expand on the findings of my first study, and to engage formerly incarcerated women themselves in community research and activism by gathering qualitative data through 30 interviews with women who were formerly incarcerated for violent offenses. The study is guided by something called feminist participatory action research. Doesn't that sound great? One of my colleagues turned me on to this, and I said, wait, that exists? I want to do that. So feminist participatory action research, or FPAR, promotes the empowerment of participants by inviting them to be co-researchers with us in every aspect of the research. And for marginalized populations, such as women who were formerly incarcerated, it provides a significant avenue for self-efficacy and empowerment. So some of the results from the interviews, which were, I can't tell you how powerful the experience was for me and my graduate research assistants doing these interviews. These women were incredibly articulate. They were resilient and strong and passionate about their children and their families, and not half as bitter as I feel like I would be if I were in their shoes. So they overall believe that there is a relationship between certain adverse life experiences and their incarceration specifically for a violent offense. They describe a cumulative effect of adverse life experiences. One of the study participants agreed to join my research team, which was me and my graduate research assistant, Joanne. And we reviewed our study results with Joanne, and we started meeting regularly with her about 3 years ago. Joanne and I and my graduate research assistant have presented our findings, held workshops in the community. We've been at university settings, conference settings. We talk about the results and the data, and then Joanne tells her story. And that's when people really start to listen. People start to listen too when we describe the fact that Joanne is a study participant and is also my co-researcher. She tells her story of being in an abusive relationship and defending herself, but being convicted of murder and doing 9 years in prison, suffering from depression, the social exile she faced upon her release, and the institutional racism she faced and faces as an African-American woman, and her incredible strength and resilience creating a new life for herself and her family. She recently delivered powerful testimony aimed at reforming the use of solitary confinement in prisons at the State House through the NASW Criminal Justice Shared Interest Group that I'm part of. We'll be presenting at the NASW Symposium in the spring around solitary confinement. Moving forward, I'm looking forward to working with Joanne in many capacities for many years in the community and in university settings. I'm encouraged by the Black Lives Matter movement. I'm trying to teach that in my courses. I had a module in it in my Dynamics of Diversity and Oppression class last fall. I'm going to try to teach it in my group class in the spring. It's a powerful movement, a movement that we should all be part of. In closing, the criminal justice system is an instrument. The social order sharpens and then wields that instrument. The criminal justice system doles out only a portion of the punishment inflicted upon certain citizens who are socially exiled. And the criminal justice system is, of course, carrying out orders. The orders come from ambitious politicians and the like who seek to create the social order. But the orders also come from the rest of us. The old saying still applies: evil triumphs when good people do nothing. Thank you.
Once again, we congratulate Daniel and Judith on their wonderful awards. We thank you for your words. They're actually a wonderful introduction to our morning conversation about race and justice. You couldn't have offered a more powerful start to our morning, so thank you and congratulations again. We'll take just a short 10-minute break for you to stretch your legs, refresh your coffee, before we begin the rest of the program.